They said the sky was the limit. But what if the sky was just the beginning? In the silence of deep space, a signal whispered through the stars, too structured to be nature, too distant to be chance. A young woman burdened with loss and lit by faith stood in the desert with only her dog beside her, and dared to answer. This is not just a story of science. It's a story of hope, of courage, of one soul who believed that love like the universe has no end. Watch until the end. And if you believe that no prayer is ever truly lost in the dark, type Amen in the comments. Chapter 1. The Girl and the Silent Sky. Flagstaff. Arizona wore the dusk like a well-worn prayer shawl, soft, familiar, and layered with memory. The January air was cold and dry, carrying the desert's quiet into every crevice of the darkening streets. Pine trees swayed gently on the outskirts, and the city's low amber lights flickered like tired stars beneath the coming night. Above it all stretched a cloudless sky, a deep velvet blue stained with the first hints of starlight. This high desert town, perched at 7,000 feet, had always been a haven for those who looked up more than forward. Emily Monroe, 29, stood on the observation deck of Lowell Station 9, a modest yet resilient facility nestled in the Red Rock Hills just outside the city. She was tall, with a quietly confident posture shaped by years of solitude and service. Her dark auburn hair was pulled back into a low ponytail, though a few strands danced around her face in the wind. Her eyes, a striking steel gray, carried a weight that didn't belong to someone her age, a quiet sorrow tucked behind intelligence like a window fogged with old grief. She wore a heavy NASA fleece dark jeans smudged with graphite and boots more suited to construction than stargazing. But she was a builder, not of buildings but of bridges between worlds real or imagined. Her late father had once told her, "Emily, you'll never find home in a house. You'll find it in the questions no one else dares to ask." He had been an astronomer before cancer claimed him. She'd been 15. Now she worked in the Deep Listening Project, a lesser-known branch of NASA's Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence program SETI. Her task: monitor and decode deep space radio signals from the Gliese systems, with particular attention to Gliese 581, a red dwarf star 20 light-years away, long suspected to host Earth-like planets. Most of the time, her work amounted to hours of silence punctuated by bursts of static. But Emily never minded the quiet. Silence had been her language since she was a girl. Beside her, curled neatly at her feet, was Orion, a 7-year-old golden retriever, with a thick honey-colored coat and large empathetic eyes the color of toasted almonds. Orion wasn't just a pet. He was the echo of her heartbeat, the warm weight in a house too often empty. Found as a stray pup near the observatory gates, he had limped up to her in the rain one night, soaked and shivering, with a torn ear and a stubborn glint of survival in his gaze. She named him after her father's favorite constellation and never looked back. Orion had a calm temperament, rarely barked, and always seemed to know when Emily needed silence over comfort and comfort over space. Tonight he rested his head on her boot, eyes half-lidded, tail twitching lazily with each gust of wind. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes yipped a song of hunger and dust. Inside the control room, the hum of machines carried on like a patient prayer. Old metal cabinets lined the walls, filled with data tapes, outdated manuals, and the smell of worn paper and machine oil. The only light came from the glow of monitors and the occasional flicker from a tiny Christmas bulb someone forgot to take down. Emily's fingers danced across the keyboard with practiced ease, tuning the frequency by microhertz. Then it happened. It was almost nothing at first, a fluctuation so brief that most software would have dismissed it as noise. But Emily didn't rely on algorithms alone. Her ears, trained over years of listening to the cosmos's indifference, caught the anomaly. It was structured. Not a beep, not a pulse, but something more deliberate. A chirp. Then a pause. Then 5 tones evenly spaced. Her heart stumbled. She tapped in a command isolating the source. Gliese 581. Confirmed. She called into the hallway. Orion up. The dog rose immediately, sensing the change in her voice. He padded to her side, ears perked, tail frozen mid-sway. Emily replayed the signal twice, then ran it through the digital spectrogram. It was real. No known satellite or pulsar emitted in that pattern. Her fingers trembled slightly as she started the protocol, logging, time-stamping, and notifying her superior. Her superior was Dr. Valerie Trent, a seasoned astrophysicist based at JPL in Pasadena. Valerie, 53, was sharp-jawed and even sharper-tongued, with salt-and-pepper hair always pinned tight and eyes like glacial stone. Though often curt, she respected Emily's instincts. They shared a history. Valerie had once mentored Emily's father, and now, with some mix of guilt and reverence, she extended that same discipline to Emily. But tonight Valerie was unreachable, a rare occurrence. Emily saved the data and did something she'd never done before. She copied the signal onto a private drive and encrypted it, not to hide it, but to guard it. She didn't know why, only that it felt sacred, like a knock on a door no one remembered building. Orion let out a soft growl. Emily turned to him, startled. He stood rigid, tail low, ears pinned back. Then, without warning, he walked to the corner of the control room, sat, and looked straight up through the narrow skylight toward the stars. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. Emily walked over and followed his gaze. Nothing unusual, except her breath fogged the glass. And on the monitor the signal chirped again. 5 tones. Then silence. Then again. A rhythm, a pattern, a presence. She reached out, hand against the cold steel frame of the window, and whispered, "What do you want us to hear?" Behind her, Orion let out a low whine, not of fear, but of recognition. Chapter 2. Dreamers in the Desert. The desert air felt different at White Mesa Station, thinner, hotter, and brimming with a restless silence that seemed older than the stars themselves. Set deep in the New Mexico expanse, the station lay like a forgotten monolith amidst cracked clay and low, wind-carved hills. Emily Monroe stepped out of the dust-caked Jeep with her arm shielding her eyes from the sun, her other hand gripping Orion's leash. The golden retriever's coat glinted in the early afternoon light as he padded beside her, sniffing the dry air with cautious interest. The wind here didn't whisper. It hissed like secrets being traded between ancient stones. The team had arrived early that morning, just before the light peeled the darkness off the hills. White Mesa was not a formal NASA site, but a legacy station once decommissioned but recommissioned now for independent observation under a quiet contract linked to SETI. It was functional but minimal. 4 prefabricated domes connected by narrow corridors. Solar panels lined along the south-facing ridge and a single radio tower stabbing into the wide open blue above. Dr. Neil Harper arrived half an hour later in a battered silver truck boots covered in red dust and a mug of black coffee that steamed like it belonged to a man who hadn't slept in days. He was 61, with a weather-worn face that looked carved more by wind than age, thin and angular with high cheekbones, a hawk-like nose, and a slow, reflective gait. His salt-white beard framed lips that rarely smiled but never frowned. Neil was a man of thought, not posture. His gray eyes had the vacant, distant shimmer of someone always halfway between here and elsewhere. Emily hadn't seen him in over a decade. He'd been her father's closest colleague, perhaps even closer than that, though neither man ever said it aloud. She remembered him at her father's funeral, standing silent, fists clenched behind his back, staring into the sky instead of the grave. Now, as he stepped from the truck, Orion barked softly once and then fell still. Neil raised an eyebrow. "Still brings the dog to work, huh?" Emily smiled thinly. "He's not a dog. He's the only living creature who's seen every mistake I've made and still thinks I'm brilliant." Neil tilted his head, then walked forward, and after a moment extended a weathered hand. "You're taller than I remember." "You're shorter than you think," she replied, shaking it. Inside the main dome, the control systems buzzed to life. Emily unpacked the encrypted data from her external drive and set up a signal map. The workstation here had stronger processing power designed for pattern recognition and real-time modeling. As the program booted, she glanced at Orion, who sat by the curved window, staring again at the horizon like he expected it to move. Neil leaned against the desk, sipping his coffee. You brought the signal. I brought the question, she answered. I'm hoping you still care about the answer. He didn't respond immediately, then nodded toward the spectral graph. Let me guess. 5-tone signature, equal pulse intervals from the same quadrant as Gliese 581. She blinked. You've seen it once. Years ago. Didn't last more than a few minutes. Thought I was hallucinating. No one else caught it. I wrote it off as machine error. Emily frowned. This time it's cleaner. Repeating. Almost responsive. Neil rubbed the back of his neck. You think someone's calling us? I think, she said slowly, someone is listening. Later that night, as the station settled into routine, Emily and Neil sat outside beneath the canopy of stars. The sky here was a cathedral draped in constellations thick with the past. Orion lay quietly at Emily's feet, but every so often his ears twitched and his head turned sharply toward the east, as if something far off were calling his name. You ever wonder? Neil asked, voice gravel-soft, why we keep looking. Emily sipped her tea. Because we can't stop. He nodded. Your father used to say science was just organized faith. That sounds like him, she said, voice catching slightly. He believed in God and equations equally. Neil's gaze lingered on the sky. I think the search isn't really about aliens. It's about loneliness. Maybe even redemption. If we find someone out there, it means we're not the only ones who made mistakes, or who survived them. Emily was quiet for a long moment. You think they'd forgive us? I think Neil said they'd understand. Inside the dome, the signal pulsed again. This time it changed. Not just 5 tones. Now a 6th, a longer one followed by silence, then 3 sharp chirps. The computer flagged it as a pattern deviation. Emily's fingers flew across the keys. Neil stood slowly. It's adapting. Emily nodded. It's watching us. Orion growled low in his throat and backed away from the window. Emily froze. Neil checked the tower feed. We've got atmospheric interference. Neil moved fast for a man his age, tapping into the tower's infrared. A blur, something warm was moving several hundred meters east of the station, just beyond the first ridge. It's not a storm, he said. Emily stared at the screen. It's too slow for an animal, too warm for wind, and too far from anything human. Neil's fingers hovered over the comms. You want to alert the agency? Emily hesitated, then slowly shook her head. Not yet. She turned toward Orion, who now stood alert and trembling. His eyes, once warm and curious, were now wide with something between awe and fear. He took a single step toward the exit. Orion, no. But the dog paused, looked at her, and sat, facing east, waiting. Chapter 3. The final piece. The morning after the 6th tone, White Mesa Station was no longer just a desert outpost. It felt like a pressure chamber. Emily Monroe hadn't slept, her eyes rimmed with red as she hunched over the control terminal, replaying the signal's variations with almost feverish intensity. Outside, the wind blew in erratic bursts, lifting sheets of sand against the dome walls like a restless heartbeat beneath the earth. Orion sat at his usual post by the east-facing window, unmoving except for his ears, which twitched at every crackle of static or distant gust. Across the room, Dr. Neil Harper poured coffee into a chipped ceramic mug, one of the few comforts left from his youth in rural Kansas. He wore the same denim shirt as yesterday, sleeves rolled up, revealing a faded tattoo of a sundial along his forearm, a relic of a life spent chasing time through the stars. His voice was graveled from years of smoking and desert dust, but still carried a certain clarity when he finally spoke. It's not random, he said. You were right. There's rhythm. Intention. Emily nodded, fingers still flying across the interface. It's more than that. It's patterned, but not just mathematically. There's structure that mimics linguistics. She gestured to the three-dimensional spectrograph blooming across the largest monitor ribbons of sound arranged in fractal-like repetitions. Nested patterns, mirrored intervals. Something not only organized but expressive. They needed help. Emily called in a favor. By dusk, a new arrival trudged across the salt-stained walkway toward the dome. Dr. Miriam Lowe, 43, stood barely 5'3" but carried herself with the authority of someone used to breaking intellectual ceilings. Her brown curls were half-tucked beneath a green beanie, and she wore round-rimmed glasses that gave her the appearance of a particularly stern librarian. She was a computational linguist from Stanford known in niche circles for her work on reconstructing proto-languages and encoding dialect shifts in pre-classical societies. Miriam Emily greeted, pulling the dome door open. "You came." "I shouldn't have," Miriam said, brushing sand off her coat. "I got a call from Homeland an hour after your message. They're watching every relay tied to this station. You realize what you've stirred up. That's why I need you." Miriam paused, looked into Emily's eyes, then nodded. "Show me." They worked late into the night, aligning the signal's inflections with symbolic logic. Miriam's methods involved treating sound like grammar, each pulse a syllable, each pause a form of punctuation. What emerged was unexpected, not code but language. A call, possibly a greeting, possibly a warning, a fragment of something ancient like an echo bouncing off the walls of time. Neil leaned in over the console. "What if it's not their language at all?" he said. "What if it's ours? Or something made to match us?" Miriam looked at him. "You're suggesting it was tailored, designed to resonate with human cognition." "Why not?" Neil replied. "If they've been watching, they'd know how we speak." Emily stared at the translation strings. "There's something else," she murmured. "Look at the inversion." At the tail end of the signal beneath the six-tone bass was a mirrored sequence almost imperceptible, like a whispered reversal of the original. Miriam isolated it and rendered a tonal spectrogram. It formed a shape, a spiral, crude, imperfect, but undeniably deliberate. Neil exhaled. "The Fibonacci curve. It's a signature," Emily said. "It's how they sign their messages." It was past midnight when the secure line from Langley buzzed to life. The tone was flat, unmarked and sterile. Emily hesitated, then answered. The man on the screen was Agent Desmond Raines, early 50s, clean-shaven, with a trimmed salt-and-pepper mustache, and an expression that never seemed to change. His navy suit was crisp, his tie darker than the desert night. His eyes were cold steel, unmoved by awe or wonder. "Ms. Monroe," he said, "you are hereby ordered to cease all signal analysis activities, effective immediately." Emily folded her arms. "Under what authority? National interest? This is a matter of potential security compromise. Your data is being redirected to classified archives. All personnel must vacate White Mesa by 0800 tomorrow." Neil stepped forward. "With all due respect, this is knowledge. You don't get to bury it." Raines didn't blink. "We'll ensure it's handled responsibly." Miriam scoffed. "Responsibly or secretly," Raines continued. "Failure to comply will result in revocation of security clearances and possible federal charges for mishandling sensitive information." The screen went black. The silence in the dome was louder than the wind. Orion whined. Emily sank into her chair, hands trembling not from fear, but fury. Her father had given his life to questions like this. Now the answer was here, and the door was being slammed shut. Neil placed a hand on her shoulder. "We don't have to go quietly." Miriam crossed her arms. "We leak it, plain and simple. They can't erase what the world already knows." Emily turned to Orion, who gazed at her with a calmness that cut through the storm inside her. She remembered the promise she had whispered years ago at her father's grave. "I'll finish what you started." She stood. "No," she said. "We won't leak it. we'll share it. They spent the next 3 hours preparing a compressed report. Everything they'd uncovered, the patterns, the tonal linguistics, the spiral. A 3-minute video, narrated by Emily herself, ending with the question, what if someone out there is already listening and we've just answered back? The upload went live just before sunrise, distributed through academic servers, encrypted mirrors, and dozens of backdoor nodes. Within minutes, it spread like wildfire across digital forums and amateur radio communities. The authorities might shut them down, but they were already too late. Emily stepped outside as dawn crept over the desert. The light turned the sand gold like Orion's coat. She stood beside him, her breath visible in the cold air. Behind her, Neil and Miriam stood shoulder to shoulder. They had broken the silence. Now they would wait for a reply. Chapter 4. The Final Signal. By the time the sun rose again over White Mesa, the desert was no longer a quiet exile. It was a focal point. Journalists, independent researchers, conspiracy theorists, and even amateur astronomers had flooded online platforms, tearing through the data Emily had released just hours earlier. The video had gone viral, not just among fringe communities, but on mainstream science news, late-night television, and government briefings around the world. Emily Monroe had become a name everyone either whispered in reverence or barked in disbelief. Inside the dome, Emily watched it unfold with quiet restraint. Her hair was disheveled from lack of sleep, the circles under her eyes now permanent shadows of responsibility. She hadn't sought attention. She'd sought truth. But truth, it seemed, demanded attention whether one wanted it or not. Orion lay curled beside her nose, tucked under his tail, his breathing slow and steady, though his ears still twitched at even the softest static coming through the speakers. Dr. Miriam Lowe, whose usually firm demeanor had softened slightly in the whirlwind of exposure, leaned back in her chair and muttered, "They're calling you the daughter of the stars now." Emily shook her head. "I'd rather be the girl with the dog who asked the right question." Neil Harper stood by the observatory window, squinting into the early light. His silhouette cut a solemn figure against the dawn, one hand resting on the glass, the other clutching a folded piece of paper. "The signal's gone." Emily turned sharply. "What it dropped off the spectrum 10 minutes ago? No chirps, no echo, nothing." Miriam joined him, rapidly checking the logs. "It's clean. No decay, no fade. Like someone flipped a switch." Emily felt her throat tighten. "They heard us." Neil nodded slowly. "Now they've gone quiet." The next 36 hours were filled with interviews, denials, counterclaims, and silence from official agencies. While scientists debated the credibility of the signal and skeptics attacked the patterns as anomalies, something far more tangible was unfolding far beyond Earth's atmosphere. It began with a minor alert from the Cassini Legacy Relay, a dormant monitoring system still orbiting near the shadowed edge of Saturn's rings. A student technician at Caltech named Jordan Bellamy, 24 years old with a frizzy halo of red hair and a mind that leapt ahead of his mouth, flagged the anomaly. He was an intern technically, but brilliant and distractible, with a habit of humming Beethoven while cross-referencing datasets. Jordan's call came through at 2:03 a.m. Hi, yeah, I'm seeing a fast-moving object near Titan's orbit. It's not one of ours." Emily, bleary-eyed but alert, was patched in via a back channel Miriam had maintained since her days at Stanford. "Define not ours. I mean, it's not tagged, it's not pinging transponder codes, and it wasn't in any of NASA's orbital projections for the week. It just appeared." Emily stiffened. How big? Jordan clicked through. "Roughly 50 meters across. Metallic reflectivity, low rotation, but precise course corrections. It's in controlled motion, not tumbling." Miriam looked at Emily. "It's a reply." Within hours, the world's space agencies had confirmed the object. Publicly, they called it an anomalous probe. Privately, many whispered the unthinkable. No nation had claimed responsibility. No design matched known technology. And most striking of all, it appeared to have changed course once it entered Saturn's gravity well, as if responding to something. Emily stood in the middle of the dome, her mind racing. We need to respond again, not with noise, with purpose. It was Neil who gave the idea shape. We build something, not to chase it, to greet it. The concept was bold and near impossible. Construct a small unmanned spacecraft designed to carry humanity's message, not just sounds, but DNA, art, culture, language, and peaceful intention. A gift wrapped in silence. A proof of trust. Not a beacon. A handshake. Emily, with her background in modular space-frame engineering, took lead on the central containment chamber, a reinforced titanium alloy core insulated with layered graphene and memory-reactive polymers. The vessel would carry engraved golden plates, micro-etched genomes, music, Earth imagery, and an AI-written primer on human emotional logic. But more importantly, it would carry Emily's father's voice. Decades ago, he'd recorded a short message for a proposed SETI time capsule. If you can hear this, know we reached for you in peace, in wonder, and in hope. The capsule was named Hopebound, working in concert with independent space agencies, crowdfunding networks, and a surge of private donations. The team initiated the fastest build and launch program in modern history. Volunteers from around the world contributed. Artists submitted visuals. Musicians sent scores. A child in Nigeria donated his drawing of Earth with a smiling star labeled Friend. Hopebound was to be launched via the Skylance 4 platform, an experimental orbital rocket maintained by Horizon Aerospace, a company known for innovation and unpredictability. Its founder, Eliza Quinn, 39, was a fiercely pragmatic woman with a platinum buzz cut, a scar across her right eyebrow from a parachute mishap, and a personal motto tattooed on her forearm. Nothing brave was ever safe. Eliza met Emily during the last assembly phase. "You're the one with the dog," she said, grinning. "I'm the one who opened a door," Emily replied. Eliza nodded. "Well, let's send them a key." Launch day came within 30 days of the first object's detection. The site, a private pad in southern Nevada disguised as an old weather station. No press, no flags, just a team of rocket and a sky heavy with anticipation. Orion stood at Emily's side wearing a harness with the NASA insignia stitched on one side and a silver patch shaped like a star on the other. He didn't bark. He just watched the rocket as if somehow he understood. The countdown began. Emily, Miriam, Neil, and Eliza stood shoulder to shoulder as the engines roared to life. At T-0, Hopebound rose on a pillar of flame. No one spoke. No one moved. Only Emily, her voice low, said, "For those who wait in the stars." Chapter 5. When the sky wasn't enough, 1 year had passed. The desert had changed. Not in the way landscapes change with seasons, but in the way hearts do, quietly, irreversibly. White Mesa. Once a relic of forgotten missions, now bore new scars. Solar panels, upgraded antennas, realigned a weather-worn plaque near the walkway etched with one phrase, "Hopebound launched here." April 27, 2037. Beneath it, a single line read, "For those who wait in the stars." Emily Monroe stood at the edge of the platform, her breath visible in the crisp morning air. The sky above stretched vast and pale blue, brushed with the thinnest strands of cirrus clouds like a cathedral dome that had grown too large for its congregation. She wore a dark blue flight jacket now bearing no logo, just a single pin on the collar, the spiral of Fibonacci. Her hair was tied back into a simpler braid, streaks of gray now visible at the temples. The world still called her Daughter of the Stars, but she didn't feel like anyone's symbol. She felt like someone who had learned to listen long enough to hear the silence become music. Orion stood beside her. He was 10 now. His once rich golden coat had faded into pale amber, the fur around his muzzle fully white and his gait noticeably slower. But his eyes, those eyes still held the same quiet fire. He no longer barked at anomalies or chased echoes across the dome floor. These days he merely watched, as if he had seen more than anyone could know, and was content to simply bear witness. The world had changed too. After Hopebound's launch, something in the global psyche shifted. Skeptics remained, of course, those who called it a stunt, a delusion wrapped in engineering, but the rest of the world leaned forward, waiting, wondering. Children wrote letters addressed to stars. Musicians composed symphonies based on the pulse patterns of the signal. And quietly, as nations argued over borders and budgets, one spacecraft carrying humanity's breath sailed past the outer planets, aimed toward a mystery that had once sent only silence in return. Emily spent the year leading quiet efforts, coordinating analysis centers, reviewing telescope data, meeting young scientists inspired by her defiance. She didn't return to media interviews. She didn't publish a memoir. She stayed in the desert with Neil Miriam and a slowly growing circle of engineers and dreamers who called themselves the Listening Corps. Neil Harper had become thinner, but no less sharp. His joints ached and his hair was nearly gone, but he spent his nights plotting new signal models and his mornings watching Orion with a fondness few could decode. Miriam Lowe returned to Stanford after the launch, but she sent packages, often charts, field notes, and once a hand-knitted scarf with embroidered waveforms. Now the day had come, the 1-year anniversary of Hopebound's launch. Horizon Aerospace now flooded with funding, and a new directorate offered to hold a global celebration. Emily declined. Instead, she arranged a quiet ceremony at White Mesa. No press, no cameras, just those who had heard the signal and decided to believe in its sender. A few folding chairs were set near the edge of the ridge. Neil sat in one wrapped in a heavy wool coat, holding a cup of peppermint tea. Nearby, a young woman named Lila Tran, 26, operated the tracking array. Lila had been one of the first undergrads Emily mentored after the launch, short Vietnamese-American with jet black hair in a pixie cut and a demeanor so calm it bordered on hypnotic. She was brilliant with spatial analytics and had a natural instinct for harmonic patterning. She never said much, but when she did, people listened. "There's movement," Lila said now, her eyes locked on the console. Emily turned. On Hopebound, Lila nodded. "Subtle thruster adjustment. It's compensating for drag." Neil raised an eyebrow. "Is that programmed?" Emily shook her head slowly. "It shouldn't be." They all stared at the readout. Hopebound, hundreds of millions of kilometers away, had just shifted its course slightly, exactly 2 degrees toward a new coordinate, one that no one had entered. Emily whispered. Someone answered. Orion, who had been sitting quietly, suddenly stood. He walked toward the console, slow but steady, and sat facing the screen. His tail didn't wag. He didn't whine. He simply stared. Outside, the sun crested the hills, bathing the desert in gold. Emily took a deep breath. The air was cold, clean, and filled with the same feeling she'd had the night she first heard the signal, wonder laced with something deeper. Purpose. She knelt beside Orion, placing a hand gently on his back. "You've always known," she said. The old dog leaned into her touch, eyes fixed skyward. Neil spoke softly from behind. "It's moving toward something." "No," Emily replied. "It's moving with something." For the next hour they watched the data scroll across the screen, quiet yet electric. Hopebound was no longer alone. Another object, smaller, darker, untagged, had emerged behind the rings of Neptune. It moved with Hopebound, mirrored its path like two dancers long separated, finding the same rhythm again. "We don't know if it's friendly," Neil said. "We don't?" Emily agreed, but her eyes were bright. By late afternoon the desert began to cool. The sky deepened into cobalt, and the stars returned one by one, reluctant but radiant. Emily sat on the observation platform with Orion curled beside her. She ran her fingers gently through his thinning fur. His breaths had grown shallower lately. The vet had warned her heart, slowing joints, failing time, drawing thin. But Orion had waited. For this. As the first signal of the mirrored object blinked on the radar, faint, slow, but undeniably structured, Emily felt a warmth rise through her, something between heartbreak and holiness. She leaned close to Orion's ear and whispered, "We did it." The dog didn't move. He simply looked up, eyes reflecting the stars, not as a destination, but as a beginning. In a world where noise often drowns out wonder, Hopebound reminds us that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is listen. Emily's journey wasn't about reaching aliens, it was about reaching deeper into who we are. Fragile, curious, aching to believe that we're not alone. And maybe, just maybe, when we act from love instead of fear, when we choose courage over silence, the universe finds a way to answer. Like Emily, we all carry quiet questions. Some of them about faith, some about family, some about purpose. But even the smallest signal, one whispered prayer, one simple act of hope, can travel farther than we ever imagined. So if this story touched something in your heart, please share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Comment below and tell us what part moved you the most. And if you believe that love, faith, and science can walk together beneath the stars, write Amen in the comments to let your light shine. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that lift the soul. And may God bless every dreamer, every seeker, and every quiet voice still waiting for a reply.